Hello, everybody. This is Gary. Today is Thursday, December 12th, 2019. It is 4:42 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the United States in Rochester, New York. And this is my coping with schizophrenia vlog entry for today. Today, I wanted to talk about the cause and onset of schizophrenia. What are some of the theories that the experts have about things that can cause or lend themselves to causing schizophrenia? And also, what does schizophrenia look like when it sets in? And at what age does it most often appear? Which is important. Uh, but, anyways, this video is just to try to answer some of those questions. Um, the causes of schizophrenia are hard to say. My situation is somewhat unique because I came from a very large family. Um, both my parents are deceased now, uh, and one of my sisters committed suicide. My mother died from alcoholism, which she was probably using to cover up an underlying mental illness. It's hard for anybody to say. She was definitely an alcoholic, but it's possible she had underlying schizophrenia or some other uh, mental illness going on there. Um, so I have, uh, I'm the second youngest of 10 children. Um, Me and my other 8 brothers and sisters are still alive. Um, and my sister certainly was mentally ill, probably schizophrenia, and she committed suicide with a shotgun. The reason I mention all this unpleasant stuff is that out of the 10 children in my family and the two parents, 3 people out of 11 had a mental illness and a history of drug and alcohol abuse, which I certainly have a history of drug and alcohol abuse, especially my college years. Um, so, what are some of the things that can cause schizophrenia? Well, because my family had a fairly large number of people that had severe mental illness or even just depression, my brother and sisters, at least some of them, have taken antidepressants in the past or in the present. Of course, depression is not the same thing as schizophrenia, uh, but it's entirely possible that depression also runs in families and is at least in part caused by genetics. Um, there was an interesting statistic that I found on marijuana use. Sometimes marijuana by itself certainly does not cause schizophrenia, but there seems to be a high percentage of people who develop schizophrenia. They were using marijuana in their teen years or maybe their early adulthood. Again, that by itself doesn't cause schizophrenia. It's unlikely that genetics by itself causes schizophrenia. There's a lot of precipitating factors that lend themselves to causing schizophrenia. Defects in the human brain. There are changes that take place in the brain of some schizophrenics, not all, but a large enough number to make it of scientific interest. My understanding is that one of the changes that happens to the brain of a person with schizophrenia is that the ventricles in their brain are larger. The ventricles are the open parts of the inside of the brain that have space in them, and they're usually filled with a fluid. Those areas are enlarged in some schizophrenics, quite a few schizophrenics, again, not all. The ventricles, larger ventricles mean less brain tissue, which it seems to occur in some schizophrenics. Um, Stress and emotional distress, physical stress over time can also lend itself to causing schizophrenia or be a precipitating factor in schizophrenia. Alcohol use is also a precipitating factor in schizophrenia. Um, I would imagine that, like marijuana, other schizophrenics might have shown early on other drug abuse, whether that's cocaine, alcohol, LSD, or whatever. Um, I'm not an expert on the cause of schizophrenia. I can only tell you my background. I definitely used alcohol and marijuana. Actually, I used black hash as well. I used to smoke it all the time. I certainly have a history of drinking. Um, was never too much into drugs like cocaine or heroin. I never really ventured outside of black hash, marijuana, and alcohol. Um, but just the genetic history of my family lends me to believe very strongly in the genetic causes of schizophrenia. I don't know if it has anything to do with the causes of schizophrenia, but my understanding is 80% of schizophrenics become heavy smokers. Like I'm a heavy smoker and I've tried to quit, and I'll try to quit maybe after the winter has gone by. I just don't feel up to trying to quit smoking right now. But does smoking cigarettes cause schizophrenia? Maybe doubtful. Anything's possible, I guess. All I know is that a great number of people who are psychotics smoke tobacco or use tobacco in some other form, like chewing tobacco. Um, so, what does schizophrenia look like when it starts to set in? And when does it set in? Well, it sets in roughly from the ages of 15 to 25. Um, and it's not a sudden appearance of symptoms. I mean, some of the symptoms are sudden, but they're so subtle that you may not have any way of knowing that it's going to become schizophrenia. Um, the appearance of schizophrenia before the age of 15 in young boys and girls, say around 7 or 8, is extremely rare. It's almost unheard of, um, which lends itself to the idea that adolescence itself, with its bodily changes, hormonal changes, puberty changes, all these physical changes happening to the body and the brain, might be one of the things that leads to schizophrenia, because in those people who are teenagers to early adulthood, the brains are still developing. So it's extremely important to recognize that between the ages of 15 and 25, when you're going through puberty and adolescence, that's the greatest number of people who have schizophrenia or get schizophrenia over time, with the gradual changes in their hormones, their body, their brains, their emotions. Emotional stresses take place when you're a teenager and you're in your early adult years, especially if you're going to school or going to college or working. That could add stress to your life. But it's extremely significant. The vast majority of schizophrenics are between, I mean, their schizophrenia starts between the ages of 15 and 25. That's a rough estimate. It depends on where you look up the statistics. It's somewhere around the ages of 15 to 25. Um, and it's not sudden. Appearance of schizophrenia may appear to be depression, apathy, may even be misinterpreted as laziness. Person doesn't have much ambition to do well at school or work. Um, they're not obviously psychotic. They may neglect their hygiene. They may start sleeping in late. Um, they may start using marijuana or some other drug, which only covers up the mental illness. It's not easy to diagnose a mental illness when it's being drowned out with alcohol and drugs. Um, the onset of schizophrenia is extremely slow. Like I said, it might appear at first to be something like apathy, depression, no motivation, no pleasure in doing anything, um, no excitement about anything, losing interest in interests that one used to enjoy. Um, and then that slowly evolves into becoming isolated, spending a lot of time alone, being a loner, losing friends that one may have had, and maybe not being able to make friends to begin with, um, finding the person becoming more solitary, more alone. Um, and all this may be interpreted as laziness and lack of motivation. But if schizophrenia is setting in, by the time the person is 25 years old, they've usually reached full psychotic diagnosable schizophrenia. They're hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there. They're paranoid. They're having delusions like they think they're God or the Son of God, or they believe they see evil spirits. They have a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. Um, they may totally misinterpret reality, have an inability to speak clearly. And they speak in gibberish known as word salad. where the words just come out of their mouth and they don't make any sense. Um, Physical appearance may deteriorate. Stop bathing. Stop brushing their teeth. Stop shaving. Uh, Wearing dirty clothes all the time. Um, Another sign of schizophrenia is dropping out of high school or dropping out of college. But just before that, grades falling slowly at first and then rapidly. An inability to hold a job or to keep a job one already has. Um, Again, lending itself to the misinterpretation that the person is lazy, unable to work, or unwilling to work when it's really an inability to work. Um, so all this takes place gradually over like 10, anywhere from 3 to 4 years, over 10 years before it becomes full blown psychosis. And I've said it before, psychosis is uh, marked by delusions, which are beliefs that a person has with no evidence, and they're even given evidence that they're wrong and they still believe in those ideas. They may think they're being followed, spied on. They hear voices and see things that nobody else can hear and see, and they respond. They act very confused. Um, and all this happens over a gradual few years to several years. And so by the time the person is obviously schizophrenic, several years have passed by, and it was hard to uh, know that it was schizophrenia and begin treatment early. Although there are some scientific studies trying to find out what the early signs are of schizophrenia with the hope of intervening sooner. Maybe the person can't be prevented from developing schizophrenia, but if they can recognize, they being researchers and doctors, if they can pinpoint some of the more earliest signs of schizophrenia, they may be able to start treatment sooner before it becomes full scale schizophrenia or full scale psychosis. Um, Dropping out of high school, dropping out of college, quitting a job, unable to keep one's grades, not having any friends, um, hallucinating, delusion. All of these things are parts of schizophrenia, and they appear very, very slowly and very, very subtly and not easily detectable, not at first. Um, and by the time that family and friends and coworkers and fellow students and friends know what's going on, schizophrenia is fully set in. And once you reach full schizophrenia, full psychosis, it's extremely difficult to treat. Um, I know none of this sounds real hopeful. I mean, if you're a parent, which I'm not, um, and your teenager seems to be going through strange, difficult times, do you know the difference between the everyday occurrences that a teenager goes through that causes problems and severe mental illness? Well, in the beginning, you often can't tell the difference um, because the onset of psychotic symptoms for most schizophrenics is extremely gradual. I wanted to go back to the idea of how often do young children have schizophrenia? Almost never, which is important because obviously nobody wants a 7-year-old kid to have schizophrenia. Um, but the fact that it happens gradually over time in the early teens and early adulthood, again, that lends itself to the idea that schizophrenia has something to do with the onset of adulthood, both puberty and adolescence, and the unique stresses and strains that a teenager and young adult go through. Trying to find out who they are, their brains are not fully developed, trying to find friends and trying to find a place where they fit in the world, and plus all the hormonal changes. Um, these are the things that most likely lend themselves to a person becoming schizophrenic. Even if it's genetic, the genetics often determines that person with schizophrenia won't become schizophrenic until after the age of 15, almost always before the age of 35, but is often before the age of 25. Um, but there was a video I saw on YouTube with Oprah Winfrey, She interviewed a young girl whose name was Seven. I'm not sure why they chose that nickname for her, but in the video, this girl was like 7 years old. She was extremely violent. She was, remember, we're talking about a 7-year-old girl. She was threatening to kill her younger baby brother with a knife. She had over 300 imaginary friends. Obviously, children have imaginary friends, but to this girl, Seven, they were real as your friends and family are to you, but don't actually exist in this little girl's case. So she was an extremely disturbed 7-year-old girl, very psychotic, hallucinations, all these imaginary friends, threatening to be violent, threatening to kill her own brother, terrifying her own parents about how violent she is. That's all very rare. And that's significant to know that because, again, this goes back to the idea of the developing adolescent brain and stresses and hormones that seem to precipitate and bring about a psychosis, especially schizophrenia. And so it may not sound very positive, and I guess it isn't, but trying to understand what's happening when schizophrenia is first starting is next to impossible. And if schizophrenia does develop, you can't blame yourself for not recognizing the symptoms in your loved one or your friend that became schizophrenic because it's not something you have a choice over or have any control over. Feeling guilty doesn't make any sense. So I know what I just said doesn't sound all that hopeful, but it is the facts as I understand them to be. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section. If you have an idea for a video you want me to do, leave that in the comment section. And share, like, subscribe, and comment.